So Mick asked this morning a couple of questions that we're going to really focus on through the conference. Is this the next revolution in agriculture? Is this the third agricultural revolution, digital ag? We've had a great scene set this morning from our first three speakers. And the second question, for Australian ag, what do we actually have to do to implement all of this if it is going to be the next revolution? We're now going to move with this session and for the rest of the conference to really sort of try and drill down into some of the detail about what we have to do. What are the technologies? What are the issues? How do we implement? How do we realise this revolution in Australian agriculture? This session is about farm level disruption, digital disruption on farm. And we're going to start with Tim Neale, who is the Manager of Research and Innovation at Precision Agriculture Proprietary Limited. Tim's one of the most innovative thinkers that I've come across in terms of practical application of technology in ag. He and I once spent a couple of hours in a car in central Queensland dreaming up ways you could use 3D printers in ag. But he's also one of the most practical and certainly doesn't get caught up in some of the hype around big data that we've heard about this morning. So I'd welcome Tim to the stage.
Yeah, thanks very much for the opportunity to come and talk to you about the sort of things that we've been doing on farm. And I guess a bit like Roz said this morning, that if we don't deliver value to growers, then we don't have a business. So we've got to take technology and solve real world problems with it. So I'm going to talk about some of the new technologies that are making money. I guess this is some work that Rick Llewellyn did on sort of the adoption of different technologies in the industry, and it's really interesting to see what sort of things work and what sort of things don't, and why they don't work, and what are some of the trigger points. And you can see there that auto steer, it's a really simple thing. It sort of almost originated in Australia in the mid-90s, has now reached the point of almost saturation in the Australian grains industry. So we've got about 75% adoption, and you can see that curve starting to level off. So there is a lot of, that's an easy one to pick up. People have made good value out of it. There's lots of return on their investment. But you start looking at some of the other bits of technology there, like yield monitoring. Basically, that 60% of yield monitoring in the red line is essentially the turnover of harvesters in Australia. That's what that's telling you. So every new harvester has a yield monitor attached to it. So essentially, people aren't necessarily going out and buying that technology, but it's coming automatically. And so often we get asked the question, I've got all this stuff on my tractor now, what do I actually do with it all? And that's sort of some of the driver to technology adoption. It's interesting, the green line, it's 30% of people actually produced a map from that yield monitor. So there's 60% of people got yield monitors, but they don't actually even look at the map that comes out of it. Only half the people do that. That tells you something, doesn't it? That tells you that there's some big impediments into people actually using this stuff to make real-world decisions. And in fact, the purple line is really quite interesting question. They asked, who varies fertiliser rates based on soil type? And most farmers have been doing that since the dawn of time. But automatically, with variable rate technology, I've put up VRT there, the actual numbers are about 10%. So while there's a lot of data being generated, the amount of people actually doing something on the ground is very, very small. Very small. And I'm going to go through some of the reasons for that. So I think there's six C's that really drive people's adoption to change. And this is probably human beings rather than just farmers, but people are interested in reducing costs, and that's either in lost productivity or reducing their input costs. It's a really key driver, as you could understand. Convenience, can it make my life easier? iPads, for example, there's no value proposition in that at all to make any money out of an iPad, but it makes your life easier. So things like that are going to drive implementation. Like all good citizens, things that we have to do, any technology that helps us doing things that we have to do is going to be adopted, isn't it? So that's one of the things that drives people. Capacity, as you know, our farms are getting bigger, we're getting less people, less labour resources, much further distance to travel. We need to do more with less, and technology's got to tick one of these boxes. One of the biggest things that's already been touched on this morning, complexity of the system. How complex is it for someone in a rural area to actually make it work? And this is a really key driver, and obviously the easier it is, the more easy it's going to be adopted. And I think the final thing that I've come up with, champions. If there's not people driving it, if there's not local champions in a district to do something different, then it'll never move forward. And I've got an example later of where we've seen in the horticulture industry that no one bothered to do yield monitoring up until this year, really, in a serious way. It's because no one actually championed it. There's a huge need, but no one actually did it. And that needs local support as well. If you come up with a number 7, it has to start with C, righto? Okay, so the big thing here is that there's a big difference between hype and reality, and I don't want to spend too much time on this because you've already heard a lot about it. But there's a whole heap of stuff going on, and all of a sudden agriculture's sexy again. We were one of the few companies that didn't go to the mining boom and chase all the big money. We stuck by it, and you know, now there's this huge push, isn't there? There's a massive interest in agriculture again, and ag technology is right up there. So people are seeing this sort of thing all the time. And I've even put Asia in there as one of the things. If you ask a dairy farmer right now what the opportunities in Asia are, he'll probably punch you, I'd reckon. So, you know, people are hearing about all this stuff, but the average farmer, and I'm not being derogatory with this, but the average cocky out there is struggling to even get some basic support in how to actually set up my AB lines. How do I set up my field boundaries and my guidance system? You know, that's where we're at. And we're missing a massive support network in this country. Most of them disappeared to the mining industry when that happened. And comms has already been talked about. It's well known that communications technology is a huge impediment. And people are after turnkey solutions. Okay, they're time poor. We need stuff that actually happens, it works, it does it without too much farmer intervention. It's got to be start to finish. Everyone knows about guidance systems and straight rows. That's just really a starting tool for the future of the digital age. The stuff that's happening in the cab now is incredible. We did it to do straight lines, but now the opportunities are massive. Now we're talking about individual row control, if not even individual plant control with planters. You know, the technology coming out from precision planting and others in the industry is changing the way we do farming, and it's all relied on digital technology to do it. And you know, these are the sort of savings that guys are getting already in Australia: $30 to $60 in canola, $40 to $70 a hectare in sorghum, just from saving that seed, because the seed cost is getting so high. Waterlogging is another big issue. There's not many people in Australia that actually work on waterlogging, funnily enough, and we reckon it's one of the biggest drivers of productivity in Australia. People just seem to overlook it like it's someone else's problem. But I tell you what, this guy here, example in southwest Victoria, waterlogged field in 2010, we fixed it up in 2011, and 100 grand gain in a single paddock in 2 years is not to be sneezed at. And you know, this is the guy's own numbers, you know, but it's such a simple thing to fix up with the technology nowadays that we've got the enabler there, but no one really is sitting out there saying waterlogging is one of our biggest drivers of productivity in this country. We can do this sort of modelling now, and this data here comes directly off the tractors when you're auto steering. As the tractor's driving straight, it's collecting a whole heap of other data at the same time. One of them is elevation, so we can actually now predict where the water's going to point in that field before even any rain falls. And in this case, we can change the run direction of that paddock and see where it changes the waterlogging in that field. And that can be all done in the desktop, all based on digital technologies that have been brought about by GPS auto steering and much better software available at the desktop. We can now reduce the cutting and filling in this case, where you might want to get the water off in 4 different, or whatever way off the paddock on the left, and on the right we want it to go one way. You can see the cut fill numbers there. The reds are the cuts and the blues are where they fill to make that paddock drain properly. And the cost to do that now is about 1/5 of what it used to be, about 1/5. So this digital technology has not only reduced, you know, the savings and the increase of productivity from no waterlogging, it's reduced the cost to do this, which has now really opened up the market to all dryland farmers to be able to do this, not just irrigators. And that's really exciting. So that's, again, digital technology. Satellite imagery. I've been banging on about satellite imagery for 10 years, and finally we're starting to see a big push into satellite data coming in. We've got better satellites, we've got much more frequent available data, and you're going to see a lot more of that shortly. Traditionally the Landsat type archives on the left, the 30 megapixels, have been around for 40 odd years. A great archive of data sitting there, but now we're starting to see the push into high resolution, and UAVs are obviously getting a lot of airplay, but satellites are going to really change in the next few years. And even now, as of the end of this year, you're going to be able to collect 3 megapixel satellite data over every hectare in Australia every day. Every single day, every hectare is going to be covered by high resolution satellite data. So what's that going to do to agriculture? So far we've done about 10 million hectares of that high res type of stuff, and about 6 million square k's of the low res or the medium resolution type stuff. So you can just imagine, if we're going to get this sort of data every day, what is the potential? How do we get it into farmers' hands? What sort of opportunities are going to spin off from that? It's really exciting times. Here's just an example of one guy. We picked up some problems in a paddock. I've been asked to talk about, what are the real value propositions in this data. This guy here wasn't spreading the fertiliser properly across the spread width, and you can see the black runs there are where the actual the spreader went. And so obviously the red areas are poor growth, and the green areas are really good growth. You can see we went out and measured some yields there, and where it wasn't spread properly, the yield dropped down to 4 tonnes per hectare, up from 6. So $200 a hectare loss just by identifying that problem with some satellite imagery that cost maybe a few dollars per hectare. So there is big gains to be made sitting in our systems right under our eyes. And the good thing is that in-season imagery that I've talked about is really useful for actually predicting final yield. In most cases, not in all cases, but a lot of cases where you've got the image on the left there of the satellite data that's come over mid-season and the resultant yield map on the right. And you can see the yield data is all over the place, like yield data normally is. But there's a good correlation between the two. So that's going to give us a lot of faith going forward to be able to predict where yields are going to be sort of placed, what sort of yields are growers likely to expect in a given season, well and truly before the harvesters go in there. And that could be powerful for marketers, for insurers, for a whole heap of people who are very interested in that sort of information. The thing that strikes me about yield variation, and this is a zoom up of one paddock of yield monitor data that we've from a client in New South Wales, is that almost every single paddock that we get, the yield monitor data, there's at least 3 to 5-fold variation in yield in that field. Every single paddock almost. So when we talk about we've got to feed 9 billion people, I think the answer is right under our noses, because if we can get those red areas to look like the blue areas, we've just solved the problem, because we could triple the yield of that field just by focusing on those areas that are underperforming. And so we keep wanting to go and clear more land and develop more areas, but in reality we've got to do more with less. And this is the way to achieve that. We've got to actually understand what's driving those low productivity areas, as well as improving the productivity of the whole field. For any grain grower in the room, you probably should shut your eyes and close your ears right now, because this is one of the first carrot yield maps, or it's actually a profit map, out of a farm in Queensland. And there's, again, like I said at the start, horticulture no one has actually uptaken yield mapping in horticulture in Australia. So it took a project, some government investment to really kick-start that, and now there's going to be a massive adoption of this sort of technology. But if this guy hasn't got any incentive, I don't know what has, because those blue areas there are between $20,000 and $30,000 gross margin per hectare. The green areas are 10 to 20,000 gross margin, and the yellow areas are 5 to 10. Now this guy, up until now, has probably gone, oh well, I've paid the bills. The average has got me through. But if we can focus on why is that blue area making 20 to 30,000 bucks, and try and lift the rest of the field to match that, or at least get somewhere close to that, even lift the average, we've made a huge productivity and profitability gain for that grower. But until he gets this data, he had no idea that variability existed, because I don't know if you've seen carrots being harvested, it's pretty messy. It's not an easy thing to do. So this sort of data enables people to actually ask harder questions, and we can find out the answers by digging deeper into that information. Variable rate lime has been one of our most successful products. We've bought some technology in from the US which would do a grid-based sampling, and we've done 60,000 hectares of grid samples so far to date. Very successful technology to use because people have this need that lime is a very big cost to the business every year, and there was no sort of way of actually determining where the high and low areas of pH or acidity are. Where do I really need lime the most? How do I actually apply that? Yeah, there's variability, so what do I do about it? So we've taken a solution where we do grid-based sampling, do the prescription maps, and help the grower implement that on ground to make sure that that actually happens. It's got to complete the full process to actually work properly. And this is just one example. There's a 1,200 hectare farm. This was in Google Earth. It's funnily enough that 80% of the farm didn't really even need lime. So $140,000 saving to what their normal program would have been. And it just so happens I was lucky I was zooming around in Google Earth, and there it was. There's the lime actually being applied variably, and you can see the areas that weren't applied. So big cost savings. That's probably one of the best we've done, but there is huge slack in the system. There's huge slack in the system to get more efficient. And phosphate's our next cab off the rank. I think it's the next in line. There's so much opportunity to improve the efficiency of our input resources whilst improving our productivity. The other big thing that's obviously going gangbusters, like 2 years ago, we would have had half a dozen inquiries at best for a variable rate seeding map. Now, it's just unbelievable. In the last 3 years, 2 to 3 years, the demand for variable rate seeding, variable rate fertiliser is growing exponentially. So there's a real push in the industry to actually change, get more efficient, target their inputs much better to the resources that are underneath the soil resources, the water resources, that sort of thing. That's an example where we've done some variable rate seeding. I'm going to talk a little bit about the opportunities and the challenges we've got ahead. There's obviously big challenges, big opportunities coming with new satellite technology. Like I said, every hectare of Australia is going to be captured in high resolution every single day as of the end of this year. You can just imagine what that opportunity is going to bring. The remote diagnostics community and the CAN bus tracking and remote support diagnostics, that sort of thing, is growing really quickly as well. So every tractor you buy nowadays has got a SIM card in it to log into the back end of that machine to actually find out what's actually happening on that machine. Because the machine data actually plays a very important role in the productivity data, as was mentioned this morning. We need to know what the machines are up to as well as what the crops are doing. And that's a really important part of that whole picture, bringing all that all together. There's been plenty talked about cloud, but I think there needs to be something independent to pull this together. There's too much higgledy-piggledy bits and pieces all over the place, and it needs someone to pull that together. The other thing about communications, the box satellites, the low-cost, low-orbit satellites are booming, and I think that's going to really change the way we do communications in this country as well as the way we do imaging in this country. And there's hundreds and hundreds of them being launched right now, so it's something to watch out for. We need to bottle up our intelligence. There's too much not enough combining of all that information. We need to get better systems to put all of our data layers together to make better sense of it. And we need the help of the people on the ground. None of this happens without ground truthing. If you think you're going to build an expert system to grow grain or grow horticulture, you're kidding yourself. It's got to come with humans interacting and bottling up what people actually know. And there's so much talk about big data, but really it comes from small data. And so we're collecting down to the plant level. You need to know that sort of information to make big data useful. And I think we need to really look at how we can close the yield gap. How can we lift those low productivity areas to meet the high productivity areas? How can we meet this food demand that is apparently here or coming? Some of the challenges, obviously, some of the people have already talked about this morning, but the size of data sets that we use is just ridiculous. You know, we have so much trouble even downloading our satellite data from the US or from Europe because we don't have NBN. You know, I'm in the middle of a Toowoomba, I don't have NBN. It takes us like overnight to download an image. It's just ridiculous. So, you know, one terabyte could be a UAV of a farm. You know, we're talking massive data sets. if we look at I've made a bit of an estimate there, but Australia-wide, there could be 40 terabytes of data coming from machinery in this country very shortly. Who's going to store that? Where's it going to be stored? Who's going to own it? Who's going to pay for that storage? 40 terabytes might not sound like that much, really, but over time, we're going to have this massive database sitting there that someone's got to pay for. Yeah, and so obviously connectivity is one of those key things that I think needs to be sorted out, and hopefully the box satellite solution is going to help fix that problem up as well. Thanks very much.